Morena tato, everybody, and welcome to the Alicia McKay Show on today, Friday, the 2nd of September. Spring has sprung, and I could not be more delighted about it. What I am doing, however, as a learned response to the introduction of spring, is I'm not getting too excited about this until we've had that dip. So that dip where you get 1-2 weeks into spring and then you get a cold snap and either it rains terribly or it's freezing cold for a week and everybody walks around shaking their heads at each other going, I thought it was supposed to be spring, or where did spring go? Nah, I'm prepared for this year. Finally, I've been alive for 33 years. This is my 34th spring and I am wise now to the spring dip. So you're not going to hear me really celebrating this march towards summer until after the dip. But look, I've been listening to the radio and feeling guilty this morning, as I like to do. One of my favourite morning routines, especially when the children are here, as they are this week, and I'm busy making lunches and things, is to have RNZ playing in the kitchen and to just experience a range of emotional responses to the news. So 2 days ago was Wednesday, which means we had opposition leader of the National Party, Christopher Luxon, on RNZ for his regular Wednesday spot. So Wednesdays are sort of a yelling at the radio experience for me while I'm busy making sandwiches and things. I'm like, answer the question, or, oh, why don't you have something useful to offer? Have you got any good ideas? Commit to something instead of, anyway. So that's my Wednesday morning routine with the radio. Sometimes it's indignation, which it was yesterday while I was listening to information about the case that's gone to trial around worker exploitation at Gloriavale, which I'm going to pick up on soon. And this morning it was guilt, because the top story was around a climate scientist from a university saying, look, guys, you can't keep popping over to Melbourne to go shopping for the weekend, or vice versa. Melburnians, you can't just swing over to Christchurch to Queenstown for a skiing weekend. It's really not responsible for us to be going trans-Tasman for a single meeting or going on long distances for short holidays. And I really sat in that one this morning as I made the lunches, because I totally agree. And like most things that have to do with being responsible and conscious citizens, global citizens of the world that we live in, require us to change our lifestyle in ways that are kind of inconvenient. So I don't love that. And I am feeling guilty about that. And I'm thinking about that. And I'm particularly thinking about the impact of very short range air travel, because I went to Auckland yesterday and it was one of those trips that I don't do very often anymore. But those of you who've done one of these trips will be familiar with it. You get up at just insane o'clock in the morning. So you start, I got up at 4:15. You get ready for the day, you drive to the airport, you catch the red eye, the 6 a.m. flight, you get to your venue by 8 a.m, you spend a day at work, you get back to the airport in time for the commuter flight home, and then get home if you're lucky in time for a sort of late dinner, which is what my day was yesterday. And it's a big day. I don't know if I'm just not match fit anymore, but it is a big day. And while I desperately enjoyed the time that I spent with the leadership team that I had gone on retreat with, it was an amazing day. And actually, if you are in Auckland and you're looking for a very cool and slightly out of the way function centre, and you don't mind giving sort of mildly Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I'm driving you into the middle of the nowhere and might murder you vibes. And by the way, the function centre is not like this at all, but you've just got to go into a very kind of winding country road, which gives you this vibe of like, I may never come back. Then Cody Bay has a venue called Cody Bay Boomrock, which is the kind of the franchise or the sister business of Boomrock here in Wellington, and it is absolutely stunning. There's an amazing view. They've got some really cool hosts, beautiful, beautiful place that they've built, and some really neat activities like digger driving and claybird shooting. And so it's a really cool space, whether you've got an event or a function or a wedding or whatever. So I was really pleased to have gone there. But that said, it was a lot of hullabaloo and a lot of jet fuel for ultimately really like 3-4 hours of conversation. And so that guilt sits on me as we begin to think about it. And those of you who follow me on LinkedIn will know that I posted a bit about some of this kind of, I don't know, the contradiction that's required to exist as a person and a consumer and a citizen in 2022, where we have awakened to so many important causes, whether it's social justice or environmental impact, but have not yet adjusted the world to support better choices in that respect. And so we're conscious of buying fast fashion, but yet the most proliferate and obvious and cheap and affordable and easy and convenient option is still to buy fast fashion, even though we don't want to buy things that were made by child slaves in Bangladesh in poor working conditions that have used terribly environmentally sourced stuff and then been shipped all around the world. And yet, despite all that transport cost and supply chain impact, still manages to cost $6. We know we don't want to behave like that, but the world is still set up for us to behave like that. And the kind of broader world around us, with working pressures and family pressures and the way that we live our lives, makes it really challenging to push against the grain, because this kind of term about conscious consumerism or conscious consumption is a very privileged kind of an idea. It depends on having the mental space and the emotional bandwidth and the energy and the intention and the time, not to mention the financial resources to make better choices around social impact and environmental impact. And most people don't have that time. And quite frankly, why the hell should we? I used to really get on my high horse in that. Do you remember that weird kind of transition phase in New Zealand where plastic bags weren't illegal yet? They were just really frowned upon. And so the supermarkets and the shops would kind of frown at you if you didn't bring in your own reusable bag. And then you would leave with a plastic bag feeling like a piece of scum. And so that was, I think, the beginning of the time when we would start carrying all the grocery items out because we didn't want the shame of a plastic bag. But I remember being really angry at the time in that transition phase, because I'm like, don't make me feel bad. Don't make me the consumer at the end of this chain who's behaving exactly as the supply chain has intended I behave. Don't make me feel bad about this. Take the plastic bags away, right? Make it illegal to profit from exploitation. Don't point fingers at buyers. And there's similar stuff that kind of gets my goat around that at the moment with, you go to Cotton On and they're like, would you like to pay an extra $2 for a charity tote bag? And you're like, oh, I mean, no. The answer's always like, I don't really. And depending on how much your conscience has been pricked that day, you either say yes or no. But I just sort of think, well, don't make it my problem. Like, why don't you just use more ethically sourced materials and pay your wages, pay your workers all the way along the supply chain livable wages? And then we won't need to worry about it, will we? It won't need to be my tote bag that's the problem. It'll be you, because you've got the power and you make the money. So perhaps you should change. So all that really pisses me off. That said, I am wearing a great t-shirt today, you might have noticed, which says period on it. And actually, I got my period today. So this works out really nicely for me. It's on theme. But this t-shirt is one of my new favorite t-shirts from Nope Sisters Clothing, which is a Wellington-based clothing line where they use New Zealand-made clothing, and then it is embroidered in New Zealand, and a portion of the profits from all of the clothing that they make is donated to relevant charities. And so this particular t-shirt, 25% of the profits from this go to Wā Collective, which supplies reusable menstrual cups to women in poverty, to alleviate period poverty. I've got 2 of their Nope t-shirts, which I've been wearing this week also, which I just adore. And profits from those t-shirts are donated to sexual abuse charities in Wellington, because obviously the theme is around consent. And so I really like that. I think it's such an amazing business model. As a consumer, you feel really good about the choices you're making. You buy into the brand story. You're proud to wear it. But, also really conscious of the fact that, they're $50 t-shirts. And you can't buy $50 t-shirts when you're broke. And actually, it's not cool that conscious consumerism relies on just being a bit bougie. So that's part of my contradiction for the week, is both wanting to make better choices and being really supportive of small businesses that do and people that take the time to do that, and railing against a system that makes it our problem when actually the world should be better to enable us to make better decisions in the first place. But anyway, look, on things that I've been feeling terrible about from the news, and there's a few. There's a few this week. One of the things that's been in the headlines this week in New Zealand that's really been pissing me off is we're starting to look at Gloria Vale again. And so for those of you who are listening that aren't aware of Gloria Vale, or you're tuning in from Australia or internationally, Gloria Vale is a little religious cult community, and it's based in the west coast of the South Island. And like most fundamentalist cult commune style situations, it is led by powerful men who do whatever they like with the women and children and followers who live there. They've interpreted the Bible in such a way as to support the way they would like to live, and the access that they would like to women and girls' bodies for both physical labour, reproductive labour, and to be at their beck and call as and when they choose. They cut off all the people who live there from the outside world, and they've established their own little economy that lives inside it, where actually they make rather a lot of money from what they grow and what they make. They're pretty business savvy. And also it's easier for them to be business savvy because they don't pay tax. They have charitable status. Now, the people who live inside the Gloria Vale community don't have access to their own money, as is also often the case in these religious cult commune living situations. So everybody works for the greater good in theory, in this very sort of lovely socialist way of living, where we share resources and we're not tied to money, which in theory I'm kind of behind. Big fan of the commune idea, but it's just never really worked out, has it? But what it means is that people have no agency about the choices they make for their families and in their lives. They're told what to wear, how to live, where to work, how long to work for. And yet, interestingly, shocker, the kind of first family of the Gloria Vale community does seem to have more status and better access to services and resources like dental care, as has always been the case. Can't believe there's a hierarchy in there. Anyway, so this is this community, and they sort of they float in and out of the public consciousness as a thing. And I've always had this really weird discomfort with the way that they've been portrayed, because actually the Gloria Vale series that we've played on TV, we played on network television, I think maybe a decade or 15 years ago. And then we've got the film that just came out as part of the New Zealand International Film Festival. And so people are watching the film in cinemas, and we get the occasional article or allegation bubble to the surface of public consciousness in the media around sexual abuse or pedophilia, or should they pay tax? Probably. Oh, well, ha ha. But we kind of just treat it as a bit of a sideshow, right? We're kind of like, oh, lol, we've got a bit of a cult. Those Gloria Vales with their blue dresses and whatever. And we sort of leave them alone, which is really very, very irresponsible, because anyone who's watched any show or read any book or knows anything about the way fundamentalist religious cults and communes work is that there is almost without exception gross abuse and exploitation that occurs in those communities. But because we always want to think we're the exception, and it's kind of uncomfortable to confront that, and it's a lot more funny to laugh at their names and the headscarves they put on their head, we just sort of let it go. Now, the particular issue that has surfaced in the media this week, and that is now going through the court system, that I found really interesting, is not, as it often is, a case of pedophilia or sexual assault that has made it into the courtrooms, but this time it is around women's work, which, if you have listened to me on previous episodes of the Alicia McKay Show talking about domestic labour and women's work, you'll know that I'm quite passionate about this particular topic. But this one is really interesting because essentially the women have gone to court and said, look, we haven't had basic employee rights that we are guaranteed to have by law. So we should get breaks. We should get pay. We should get sick leave. We should get reasonable working hours, just some really kind of bare minimum pre-Henry Ford type employee protection. And the argument that is being made by the leaders in Gloriavale who've been put on trial for this isn't about the conditions, right? So they acknowledge, yes, you work 12 hours a day and it's very hard and you don't get a break and whatever, of course, but you're not employees, so it doesn't matter. So the argument being made by Gloriavale is that the work that these women are doing, working in commercial kitchens, commercial laundries, large-scale childcare centres, working in gardens, sewing and creating the many hundreds of blue polyester dresses from material that's imported from China that gets made in Gloriavale every year. The argument isn't that they're not doing that. And the argument isn't that they're not doing that under really poor conditions. The argument is that it's not employment. And I just want to sit with this one for a minute because there's a lot to think about here. And this is probably one of the worst extensions I've seen of this idea of unpaid women's work, or the idea that it couldn't possibly be work because it's women's work, right? It's childcare, it's washing, it's gardening, it's housework, it's cooking. Well, obviously, these are things women just do, right? Especially if you're in a kind of subservient, really patriarchal, hierarchical, family dominant structure like you would be in Gloriavale. That couldn't possibly be work. That's just what the women are doing. I mean, sure, they have to go back to work a week after they have their babies, the number of which they have they're not allowed any control over. They have to go back to work literally a week later and carry with them a walkie-talkie because the babies are all put in a large-scale childcare centre and you're notified by walkie-talkie when your baby needs feeding. And that sounds a lot like work, but it can't be because what they're doing is basically just a lot of domestic labour. And the audacity of this one has just really sat with me all week because they're not even trying to pretend that these women are being treated fairly. They're just kind of doing the shrug of like, yeah, but like, it's got to be done, eh? It's not like real work. It's not like tilling the fields or whatever. It's not like manufacturing. It's just lady stuff. Like, they have to do it anyway. Why would we treat them as employees? And so that really has pissed me off. So there's a lot that pisses me off about this whole Gloriavale situation and this new kind of this new fresh wound around the way that they view, not that it should be remotely surprising, women's labour is another one. And so it's going to be really interesting to see how this particular argument plays out in the judicial space, because it's not a question of working conditions. It's whether or not women's work could be considered work. And so I think that's a really interesting thing for us to keep an eye on. And I encourage you all to keep an eye on this particular case to see how it plays out. More broadly, I would like to see a couple of other things challenged about Gloriavale. One is that why is it that when you are an abusive, exploitative, horrific cult, but you say it's for God and you're white, you get away with it? That there's a controlling assumption that you should be left alone and that things are good. Because if you contrast and compare the default assumptions we make about religious cults and the default assumptions we make about gangs in New Zealand, and you could argue that they are both groups of people who have sought to find family belonging, culture and connection outside of mainstream society where they didn't feel as though their needs were being met. They contribute to an alternative economy. They live by a series of their own rules, guidance and dogma. But the assumption that is made about the white Christian cults in this particular dynamic are that unless we've got irrefutable evidence, which actually in the case of Gloriavale we literally do in terms of court cases around pedophilia and sexual assault, but let's just put that to the side. Unless we've got utterly irrefutable evidence that the thing has to end, not only do we sanction their behaviour, not only do we give them charitable status and not require them to pay tax on the money that they are earning off the back of people who are not being compensated for their labour, but actually we make them a little bit famous and have a laugh about it. We make TV shows about it, right? We make films about it. We have a wee giggle, right? We allow them to be a spectacle and to continue operating, and we co-sign it. A gang, the default assumption, regardless of any evidence presented to the contrary, is that that is a bad group of people that must be stopped, right? And so if you've got gang insignia, you are not allowed to enter a public space, a workplace, a university, a school. You would never admit your gang affiliation. There is some argument to be made that there is also not a lot of tax paid on some of the economic activities of gangs, but I'm not here to comment on that. But the default assumption made about a gang is that they are definitely bad by virtue of the fact that they're a gang. Whereas the default assumption made of a religious cult is that they're probably good, and it's racist, and it's classist, and it's pathetic, and I'm not okay with it. And I think that ends my Gloria Vale themed rant for the morning. So I hope you enjoyed that. But anybody who knows a lot more about Gloria Vale than I do is more than welcome to send through additional information, because it is a really fascinating situation. And what it does bring to light for me is something that I often get very frustrated with, that I think we're all guilty of, is this kind of idea of exceptionalism, where even though we know that the patterns around behavior and trends and a repetitive history of behavior. So religious cults is one example where we're like, can't really think of a story where that's sort of turned out well. And the people that have left have said, we were actually treated very nicely. It was very respectful. I'm pleased I left. We parted ways amicably. I mean, I've never heard one of those stories, but also, media sensationalism. Maybe they exist and I don't know about them. But we're like, well, I know we've got one of those cults and that this stuff keeps coming out about how it's exploitative and abusive, but like ours probably isn't one of them, or in a household situation with gendered division of labour, we know that the statistics are very clear that women take on a staggeringly disproportionate amount of household labour, and not just the domestic housework stuff that we do, like vacuuming and washing, but all the mental stuff that's a lot harder. Like, it's not that hard to cook dinner. It is a lot harder to think about people's dietary requirements, plan a menu for the week, do the grocery shopping, put the groceries away and make sure all of the ingredients are there. And also that you've planned meal times around different activities that are happening this week. And, what time was sport again? I better send in that email. That's hard, right? It is hard to remember appointments and shoe sizes and the timing of netball games and school events. That stuff is hard. Right, that's the stuff that we do that's disproportionately, almost completely managed by women inside this kind of community and economy that depends on that labour to exist. So we know that. We know that to be true. We know that not only do we do more of the physical housework, that we do all the rest of the stuff. But yet all the time I talk to people who are like, yeah, but it's not like that. That goes up half an octave. Yeah, but in my family, it's not that, And actually he does quite a lot, like he mows the lawns and, he fixes the stuff, and it's just it's not a gender thing, like in our household. It's just, we're just better at different stuff. She actually really likes cooking and that. She's better at it. She just remembers it. I'm hopeless. Oh, I'm so hopeless. I mean, I can operate a smartphone. I can run a business, but I just don't know how to work a washing machine. It's just too much for me, too much to remember. And so we use this kind of narrative of exceptionalism to justify how really sustained and embedded trends and patterns from society play out in our own lives, but that it's not that. And so often I find that when I'm getting on my feminist high horse and raising issues in a social situation, they're like, oh, come on, Alicia, it's not that, not now. Don't play the gender card. And so all the time we think that we are the exception, right? And that, yes, there might be bad stuff happening out there, but that's not what's happening here. And when we apply that logic to communities like Gloria Vale, that gets really dangerous, right? Or when we bend the rules around what we know for people because we like them or because we know them, we allow people to get away with perpetrating that behaviour. And so in the news this week, here's a good one. We've got Leonardo DiCaprio, who has just dumped his 7th girlfriend in a row because she had reached the age of 25, because in his entire dating history, Leonardo DiCaprio has never dated a woman who's turned 25. That's his cutoff, right? And it's not once, it's not twice, it's not 3 times. It is 7 distinct relationships with young women who kind of happen to be supermodels, where once they reach the 25-year-old cutoff, the relationship comes to an end. And he's been doing this for his entire life, despite the fact that, I mean, get this, he actually keeps getting older. So when he started like this, and there's a great graph, I should see if I can put it up for you actually, there's a great graph that a Redditor has made to demonstrate this particular trend around what's happened with Leonardo DiCaprio's dating history. And it starts from when Leonardo DiCaprio is 24 right through to today, where he is 45. And actually, one of my favorite tweets on this week has been a tweet, I think 2 days ago, that said, "The woman that Leonardo DiCaprio will date when he is 72 was born today," which is a really terrifying thought, right? And so, all right, here's the graph, which is a little bit challenging to see, probably unless you have it full screen on your phone or your computer, but essentially it tracks Leonardo DiCaprio's age against the age of the woman he's dated, which is, while his is going up in quite a linear fashion, shocker, the graph down below, who met the age of his respective girlfriends and wives over that time, has really just kind of, stayed pretty consistent. And while we know the information around predatory old men targeting young women, and that there is almost always an abuse of power involved, and that women and girls who are in their late teens and early 20s are not in a situation where they should be feeding off advances by adult men in their 30s and 40s, and that actually there is no way that what adult men in that situation are looking for is an equal partnership, and that they just happen to have come across like, it's not like that with us. It's different with us. It's not an abusive power thing. It's not like a yucky old guy thing. It's just that, she's really mature. She's an old soul, and we just have a special connection, right? And so that kind of exceptionalism that we apply to the relationships in our lives stops us from having to confront the reality of the trends that are playing out in our own lives. And that is particularly true when it's people that we kind of like. So we're like, oh, but he's such a good actor, right? And I had such a massive crush on Leonardo DiCaprio from when I was, I don't know, like 12 till probably fairly recently, when I just sort of got turned off the behavior that we're continuing to enable in men like Leonardo DiCaprio and getting away with it. But watching people react to this has been really fascinating, because actually, while he has been the beneficiary of exceptionalism for all of the commentary on his dating choices across his career, and like, let's be fair, this is going to blow away really fast, and then he's going to move on, and we're just going to get over it again. But he is being called out for it. He is being shamed for it, because in this particular situation, there is just such a laughably consistent pattern that we can no longer argue exceptionalism like we like to do in these sorts of situations. And so just to kind of continue this 2022 trend of all of our like late 90s Hollywood heartthrobs really just failing us, the whole thing just falling in, and us having to confront that actually most of them, despite being quite good actors, are also abusive, greedy, entitled men, whether it's Brad Pitt beating his wife and children on a flight, or Johnny Depp wanting to fucking burn the corpse of his girlfriend, or Leonardo DiCaprio dating exclusively women in their late teens and early 20s, despite the fact that he is now advancing toward 50. Perhaps you can be a successful actor and a good guy and actually still not be an exception to the rule of the culture in which you have been produced from. And so on that, as a final note, please do not buy tickets to see Louis CK. If you are a fan of the show, if you follow my stuff, and if you have seen Louis CK's advertising come across your social media feeds, or perhaps you've been sent an email from a ticketing outlet and you're like, oh yeah, Louis CK, I remember something he did that is funny from 10 or 20 years ago. And I also remember there was some icky stuff, but that's probably past, and it must not have gone anywhere because he's still touring. You cannot separate this artist from his art. You cannot separate the racist, misogynist, punching down humor that Louis CK enjoys from his repeated, admitted behavior abusing women sexually in his trust. And no, there is not an expiry date where we go, oh, they've suffered enough, haven't they? I mean, this is his job. Let's go and see him. No, do not go and see Louis CK, right? Do not co-sign the repeated allowances of men like Louis CK, who not only get to behave in that way, but also get to make a living from it, right? You cannot separate the art from the artist in the case of Louis CK, and I implore you to please not support what he finds funny and the way that he lives by going to watch any of his comedy shows. And if you need a quick reminder, actually, I do want to share with you just a couple of segments from his apology statement that was released in 2017, where he admitted that, yes, okay, actually, we'd had rumors going around for a long time, kind of quietly, about Louis CK's behavior after shows in comedy circles. But essentially, we had 5 women who went to the New York Times and said, look, he forced me to watch him masturbate. Like, he shut a door behind me and forced me in his dressing room to watch him masturbate, and it was awful, right? And so these were not like, it's not like he shut 5 women in a room and it was like, watch me masturbate day. It was a repeated pattern of behavior that he enjoyed, this particular kind of power play, and he'd done it quite a lot. And so they'd all gone to the New York Times, and it all burst open in 2017, and he was quiet for a bit, and then he was like, right, I'm going to respond. And so he puts out the single worst apology statement I've ever seen from anybody, who was essentially saying, like, yes, I am a sexual predator. And his apology was that how admired he is, basically. So he put out this apology and he said, look, I thought it was okay that I did it without asking. I said, no, I never did it without asking first. Love a bit of plausible deniability on consent. And he says, so that's not good. But actually, they really admired me, and I put them in a real predicament by asking them to look at my dick, because I had a lot of power over them because they admired me. And he just goes on, and this apology statement goes on about how remorseful he is, because he's just learned, he's just figured out that the women who admired him felt really bad about themselves now. You see how often, like, if you control left for the word admired in this apology statement, you'd be like, wow, that's not great. Like, my English teacher wouldn't love that. He's just so admired, not by them, but also their community. So they couldn't speak out about what had happened. And he's just really disappointed in himself and the way that he reacted to their admiration. So actually, by forcing them to watch him masturbate, that wasn't even a proactive choice. It was just a reaction to such overwhelming admiration. And this was his apology. So just, if you needed a little bit of convincing, that didn't include me playing clips of him using slurs like the N-word or the F-word or punching down while he talks about women or children or people of different sexualities or races to him, then hopefully that apology helps seal the deal. Please, for the love of God, do not go and see Louis CK. All right, so I reckon that just about wraps us up for this Friday morning, where we have taken a bit of a stab at just how hard it is to be a conscious consumer in an environment and in a system and in an economy that really doesn't kind of want us to, but does blame us when we're not. And so the kind of walking hypocrisy that is existing with any thought in 2022. We've talked about Glory Vale and how we do sort of outright refuse to acknowledge that women's work is work, and that we are sanctioning some really terrible behavior in our community by enabling Glory Vale to continue operating the way that they do. And then we just sort of took a couple of cheeky digs at Leonardo DiCaprio and Louis CK to round us out, because it's that kind of a Friday. All right, everybody, I thank you so much for joining me again this week and for coming along on this journey with me. I do so appreciate all of you who come along, not just sometimes, but particularly those of you who really do make an effort to tune in, whether it's on LinkedIn or Facebook or YouTube every week, and watch the live stream. I really do appreciate you coming along. And it's It is an absolute privilege to be able to have this platform to speak to you about things that are currently pissing me off. All right, go out there, everybody. Enjoy your Friday. Have a fantastic weekend. And I will see you back here next Friday, the 9th of September. See you later, everyone.